Welcome to the Aaron Harber Show and our special series with former FBI Director Robert S. Mueller. So, we talked a little bit about 9/11, and there are actually people here, a few, who were either not born yet in 2001 or were just born that year. And so obviously the memory of that for many Americans is faint or non-existent. Let's talk about where you were on 9/11 and what happened.
Well, as Ken pointed out, I was sworn in a week before September 11th and was just getting my feet on the ground, so to speak, learning the organization when 9/11 came around. And on that day, I was just in a conference room outside my office getting briefed on another terrorism case. And an agent comes in and says, "Director, there's a plane that struck a tower in New York." And you look outside and you ask, "Well, what's the weather like up there?" It's beautiful in Washington. I said, "Beautiful." And by the time you've had that discussion, another agent comes in and says, "Well, Director, another plane has struck a tower in New York." And by that time, we understood that this is something unique, quite possibly some form of terrorist attack. And very shortly afterwards, the plane went into the Pentagon, right across the Potomac, and we from our offices could see the smoke coming up from the Pentagon. We knew by that time it was a series of terrorist attacks. I think we probably suspected bin Laden and Al-Qaeda because of their capabilities at that point in time. And we went down to a room on the 5th floor, our situation room we call it, where we go whenever we have a crisis along those lines, any terrorist attack. And we're in a room with a feed from the FAA, Federal Aviation Administration. And we're down there for 5 or 10 minutes, and a voice comes over the loudspeaker and says, "Hijacked plane, inbound Washington, D.C., 80 miles out." And what I remember most vividly is sitting there and going through your mind is, there's a hijacked plane out there, and the target is someplace in D.C. Is it the Capitol? Is it going to be the White House? Is it going to be the FBI building? And 5 minutes after that, a voice comes on again and says, "Hijacked plane, inbound Washington, D.C., 50 miles out." And of course, that plane never made it to Washington because it was taken down by the passengers and was driven into the fields of Pennsylvania.
Flight 93.
Flight 93, yes. But what sticks with me is the surreal being there, knowing that a series of attacks had occurred, and there's one more that is going to hit it.
So what steps did you take at that point? What happened? And from the inside, I'd like to know, what happened?
Well, first of all, I was brand new. So one of the things I knew and understood is I had to get out of the way and let the FBI do what the FBI does best. They didn't need me meddling after a week on the job. One anecdote, I called into the FBI headquarters maybe a day or two after September 11th at night, and I call in, get the FBI operator, and she says, "FBI." I say, "This is Bob Mueller." She says, "Who?" I said, "The new director." She says, "Oh, okay." And I went on to say, "Well, I want to know who is in charge," and I think I said Situation Room. And she pauses for a second. She says, "Well, you want to know who's in charge?" I said, "Yes." She says, "Well, you're in charge, Director." And, I saw the daylight.
You talked about constitutional rights. I'd like you to because that's certainly an area you have great expertise. I'd like to hear more about the balance in terms of information being collected by the government and the decision in terms of what the government wants or what different government agencies want and what they truly need. I'd like you to make that distinction and reference Edward Snowden. Certainly what Snowden did, I know when I had General Michael Hayden on the show and we've had others heading up the NSA or the CIA, a lot of concern, great concern about some of the information released. But at the same time, Snowden certainly revealed to the American people what many of the activities of the American government were that I think a lot of Americans were disturbed by.
I don't disagree with the latter statement in terms of persons being disturbed by the activities. I would tell you that if you, as have individuals from the other agencies, to say he has done substantial damage to our capabilities when it comes to preventing terrorist attacks and other national security priorities. But if you look at the one aspect that was brought out early on was what they call the 215 issue, and that is the accumulation of metadata as to who called who when, and in one database readily searchable. And in the wake of September 11th, the 9/11 report came out and said there was a gap. We perhaps could have stopped September 11th if we had had that kind of database. And I give you an example of the position I'd be sitting in, and if you take the Boston Marathon bombing. It occurred on a Monday. We pulled in all the video cameras in that portion of Boston. Were able to identify 2 individuals who put down knapsacks at the particular place where the bombs went off, but we did not know who they were. And because of that, we went on a Thursday night and published it, and they realized they were done. They got into a shootout outside of Boston. Older brother was killed, younger brother survived. And I'm sitting in the situation room, the same situation room sitting in on September, later on September 11th. An agent comes in and says, well, we've identified them, and we have the brothers' information. My concern at that point in time is you've got one person loose out there. We have the example of 4 separate attacks on September 11th. My greatest concern is there going to be another attack. And one of the important things for me to know is who had these people contacted. Where do I go to find out who may be helping them undertake an attack? And that readily searchable database was critically, I wouldn't say critically important, but used in that type of situation time and time again. It is still out there, and one last thing about the balance of national security versus privacy. We are the only country, and I put this to people who, particularly the media, who don't put it in, that requires the director of the FBI and the attorney general, if they want to intercept conversations, to go through a court, the FISA court, Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act court. I can't sign off on a piece of paper. Attorney General can't sign off on a piece of paper and do it. It's a third branch of government. No other country has it to the extent that we have it. And that is a pretty good, in my mind, guardian of our privacy, given the threats that we have, both domestic and overseas.
For information on how to help promote civil and mutually respectful discourse and support expansion of the distribution of our programs, please email info@harbertv.com.
I'm Aaron Harber, host of The Aaron Harber Show. You can follow the show on Twitter for instant notification of new episodes, live event invitations, outtakes, and behind-the-scene photos. And tweet us your topic and guest suggestions today.
The Rex Howell Broadcaster of the Year Award recognizes an individual who, through leadership, skill, and dedication, is advancing the broadcast industry in our state and our nation. Tonight, we honor Aaron Harber. Aaron has worked extensively in the media as a host, producer, political and economic commentator, and columnist. Today, the Aaron Harber Show is the focus of his media involvement. Aaron, it is a privilege to present you with the Rex Howell Broadcaster of the Year Award. Congratulations.
Just make journalism great again. I'm Aaron Harber, host of The Aaron Harber Show. I very much would like to hear from you about the program, so please send me an email with your thoughts. You can suggest what topics I should cover, what guests I should invite to be on the show, or even what specific questions you would like me to ask. This is your program, so send your suggestions to aaron@harbertv.com. I promise to personally read every one, so email me today. And most of all, thanks for watching.
The Aaron Harber Show may be viewed 24/7 at no charge from any location in the world at harbertv.com.
I think one of the things that many Americans don't appreciate is, we have such an open society that, which we want, doesn't that really make us vulnerable in the sense that, I mean, you can come and go. We have the Second Amendment, so people can have and carry weapons, whether it's infrastructure, water supplies, electrical, communication grid, or whatever. Aren't we actually, in reality, on a number of fronts, very, very vulnerable?
I think we're certainly vulnerable when it comes to the type of information that is out there, that is a type of information that is out there and available to those who want to find it and want to do damage or harm to us. We're also, to a certain extent, vulnerable by the fact that we live by the rules passed by Congress. I have to show, if I want to get an application before the court to intercept somebody's conversations, I have to show probable cause to believe that that person is affiliated with a terrorist group. And if I don't have that probable cause, I can't do it. We've had instances, Al-Aqwi, a relatively famous individual, exhorter of the type of terrorism we've seen in the United States, was doing videos and like for a substantial period of time before the Fort Hood shooting, and it's only after that that we found that he was involved in the operations. Any other country, they may well have been up on his wire beforehand because there was no responsibility of showing a court that there's probable cause to believe that this individual is engaged in terrorist activity.
We lose 30,000 or more people a year to gun violence. 33,000 people a year die through the use of guns. 2/3 of that is from suicides. And our numbers are just extraordinary compared to other countries on a numerical basis, on a per capita basis. You have to have given this some thought. What is going on in our country where we're killing each other and ourselves at those kind of rates?
Well, the fact of the matter is that the violent crime rate in the United States has gone down rather dramatically over the last 5 to 10 years. And if you ask the sociologists, you ask those who look at this, what are the causes of the reduction of crime? There is no one cause, and it seems to be unique to a particular city that they've had a reduction in crime, although it seems to have occurred over a period of time. Community policing is part of it. The fact of the matter is, in the United States, the Second Amendment, you have the right to carry arms, bear arms, and that is not a right that you have in other countries. There are other countries that are even worse than we are. In Latin America, some of the countries that where there's a turnstile in terms of gang members, El Salvador, other places where gangs are running rampant and guns are prevalent. So we've got some company out there, but boy, do we have a long ways to go.
All right, speaking of gangs, in terms of industrialized countries, certainly we've got such a variety of challenges with gangs, both gangs locally, as it were, others who've gone from city to city, some who have actually infiltrated from other countries. Mexico, you and I have talked about before. What's the special challenge, and how do we address that?
Each country has their own special challenge. I mean, we have the West Coast gangs, we have East Coast gangs, we have the Midwest gangs, basically. They've grown up in different venues for 30, 40, 50 years. And it's very, very difficult to stop, and you will have episodic victories, but long term, you're not going to eradicate gangs. In any particular communities, you can successfully address it. But we're not the only country in this regard either. In Europe, Eastern European gangs. And also motorcycle gangs. You've got motorcycle gangs in the West Coast, the South. You've got motorcycle gangs in Scandinavia, for instance. And so gang activity is not necessarily unique to us.
All right, I'm going to jump to the international. I want to talk a little bit about cyber issues, cybercrime, terrorism. Daesh, or ISIL, seems to have had extraordinary success cyber recruiting. Am I wrong about that, or what's your sense of what they've accomplished, what they're doing? And I also want to know why are they allowed? I mean, why do they have the opportunities to be in social media or on social media at all? Why can't we stop that?
Well, let me address the last one. But the First Amendment, right to speech. it often is a very fine line as to which it is. I think depending on the particular companies, some are better than pulling down websites than others. And I know there is efforts underway to find ways to convince the companies that are responsible for a great deal of the social media to be more proactive in stopping it. But the fact of the matter is the internet is so ubiquitous, the ability to move from place to place to place, you can staunch it for a period of time, but anybody who wants to find that propaganda will find that propaganda. As for the first part of the question, we are in a new age when it comes to, I think, cyber terrorism. 21,000 or so foreign fighters have gone to Syria or northern Iraq, and many of them have skills that previous generations have not had. We've started to see the use of those skills. They took down Channel 5 in Paris, and also we had the instance where they posted the names of our military, 100+ military personnel with exhortations to others to go out and do damage to these persons and their families. That was undertaken by the cyber resources of ISIS.
Are we under, whether it be corporately or the government, especially the federal government, are we under constant cyber attack by China?
Yes.
And what can we do about it?
Well, I mean, we arrested 6, no, it was 5. We didn't arrest. We indicted 5 individuals from China up in Pennsylvania a year or 2 ago. There are activities are undertaken by the government to both identify and address both the FBI, CIA, NSA, the substantial efforts of China to get our intellectual property, and whether it be in the military side or the corporate side, and utilize those thefts to skip ahead in terms of developing the types of things that we develop here in the United States. I tend to think, though, that China can gather pieces of information, but what you do not see is the capability of China to come up with an Apple or a Google or a substantial technological advance, whether it be with jets or with items on the internet, because they don't have the support of the financiers, for one, and secondly, the ingenuity that we display in the United States in coming up with a fix when we need a fix driven by the economics. And so while we undertake or undergo terrorist attacks in the cyber realm, I am optimistic about our ability as a country ultimately, when we get our act together, to address it.
Is there a solution to advance technologically simply to get our secrets?
Is there a, I'm sorry, the question?
Is there a solution in China in terms of to address that?
In substantial part, yes. And also to enter into joint ventures and the like, where they may have access to the technology and import it into China, and China would be ahead on that.
Let's talk about individuals and the cyber world. I mean, there's a lot of discussion about cyberbullying today in terms of, and also how young people use social media, the internet. Give me your thoughts, and maybe, not necessarily as the FBI director, but what are some themes or practices that are worth looking at?
Well, cyberbullying, I know, is being handled generally on the state side with state legislation. I look at it, frankly, as a father with children, with their ability to use Facebook and the like, knowing that anything you put on Facebook is going to be there and be there and be there and be there, and not just Facebook, just about any site. And who at that age understands the consequences of doing something when you're 16 that may come back to haunt you when you're 25 and you're seeking a job in not the private sector necessarily, but in the public sector that you really want, but some of the things that you said or done or taken way back when preclude you from exploring those options.
I mean, and when you're talking about that, the concept that even if once you post something, even if you take it down, that doesn't mean it's gone.
It's true.
And certainly a lot of people don't appreciate that and find out the hard way.
Your opinions, ideas, suggestions, and criticisms related to guests, topics, questions, or the host are welcome. Please send an email to producer@harbertv.com.
I'm Aaron Harber, host of The Aaron Harber Show. Find us on Facebook to get all the latest updates, see behind-the-scene photos, and make comments and ask me questions. You can see episodes before their TV broadcast, so like the show today.
The Rex Howell Broadcaster of the Year Award recognizes an individual who, through leadership, skill, and dedication, is advancing the broadcast industry in our state and our nation. Tonight, we honor Aaron Harber. Aaron has worked extensively in the media as a host, producer, political and economic commentator, and columnist. Today, the Aaron Harber Show is the focus of his media involvement. Aaron, it is a privilege to present you with the Rex Howell Broadcaster of the Year Award. Congratulations.
Just make journalism great again. I'm Aaron Harber, host of The Aaron Harber Show. I very much would like to hear from you about the program, so please send me an email with your thoughts. You can suggest what topics I should cover, what guests I should invite to be on the show, or even what specific questions you would like me to ask. This is your program, so send your suggestions to aaron@harbertv.com. I promise to personally read every one, so email me today. And most of all, thanks for watching. Hi, I'm Aaron Harber, host of The Aaron Harber Show. It's tough for me to limit myself to 140 characters, but you can see how well I do by following the show on Twitter. Follow me at @Aaron Harber.
The Aaron Harber Show may be viewed 24/7 at no charge from any location in the world at harbertv.com.
This segment features questions from the audience for former FBI Director Robert Mueller. The audience of over 500 attendees not only included FBI agents, Homeland Security officials, as well as other law enforcement officials, but also had over 200 high school students from a number of different school districts.
My question is, you were instrumental in changing the FBI to an intelligence-led law enforcement agency. Could you please describe an executive decision that you made to help bridge the gap between the intelligence personnel and the field agents that trickled all the way down to help bring them together to work as a team?
Well, you focused on a very difficult issue that any intelligence/law enforcement agency addresses. You want the intelligence analysts together with the agents to provide a day in, day out a tactical intelligence, but you also want intelligence capability to look at strategic intelligence. I wrestled with the appropriate organizational structure to maximize both strategic and tactical. It doesn't often work easily, and what I found, I think, is that it depends on the personnel in a particular office. We had some offices that did terrific jobs in integrating the intelligence along with the investigative capability of the agents. And where we had good analysts, where we had productive analysts, it worked famously, and the teams were great. Other places where personalities, the persons on one side or the other didn't have the capability, it didn't work as well. But you touched on a problem that is a continuing problem and that needs to be reworked and looked at in an agency such as ours.
You know, Bob, one of the things I'm interested in is the fact that there are so many different intelligence agencies or departments. I mean, you have obviously the FBI, the CIA, the NSA, National Security Agency, the Defense Intelligence Agency, and many, many more entities like the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency. there seem to be so many different agencies. Is there a way, or does it make sense to look at maybe some kind of consolidation so there are better lines of communication? I don't even see how, with so many different agencies, that the members of each can communicate with each other.
There can be consolidation, but one of the facts of the matter is, and I think it's appropriately so, that we each gather information under certain statutory guidelines. CIA cannot gather information in the United States. I think it ought to remain that way. I don't think the CIA ought to be, and the FBI gathers information domestically. It can through our counterparts overseas, but we don't have the same authorities overseas as the CIA does. And I do think it's important to make certain that you align the responsibilities with the particular agency. The FBI has always operated principally in the criminal justice arena. If you're going to do a search, you're going to need a warrant. If you're going to do a wire, you need a warrant. The persons who are witnesses will probably be on the stand at some point, and so you are regulated by the criminal justice system. The intelligence side of it, you are not, unless you go to the FISA court. And my concern, quite frankly, was that we would lose sight of our goals where you don't have that monitoring by the criminal justice system. I think we've done it well, though, but it has been a concern throughout. Let me just put it that way.
Were a few mistakes made during your tenure?
Oh, sure. Actually, most of them, a mistake I made in terms of technology. If you're talking domestically in the FBI, sure, we've made some mistakes. Personally, some of the more grievous mistakes I made were personnel, where I put somebody in a position but didn't give them the support to get the job. I mean, some of my frustrations are the ones where I made bad choices, bad decisions when it comes to personnel. And many of the decisions you make are in response to critiques of your organization. And while you may get upset at a congressional panel or upset at the Inspector General, in retrospect, coming out of it were ideas and pathways that you perhaps would not have seen.
What do you do in cases where agents collected data or information without the appropriate authorization?
Well, whenever we do substantial internal auditing to assure that that does not happen. When it does happen, we find that on the one hand, you would discipline and take appropriate discipline in the agent. On the other hand, if the information was not appropriately taken, then we would discard it.
My question is on leaks, not on the Snowden level, but say the bank account tracing and so on. And I wonder how much damage you believe the media has done in publicizing smaller leaks that come to them and that they print.
Well, depending on the issue, yeah, I think the media has been somewhat destructive. One of the concerns I have is when there is a leak of top secret or very classified information, the decision is made by the editors of the particular media, and they are taking into their own hands a decision as to whether or not it is against or undercuts national security by telling the public about this. And that, to me, should be left in the hands of Congress. Congress comes out, says disclose it, so be it. But the decision by the media to make something public upon occasion does substantial damage, and the decision is being made by one or two individuals in the media as opposed to by others in our democracy who are, one would say, perhaps better informed, but also much more cognizant of the damage that would be done by leaking a particular aspect of our defenses.
Please contact us. We want to hear from you. And thanks for watching.